AITA for refusing to give my brother his rightful share of our parents' house. So, some backstory. My 32M younger brother, Jake, 28M, has always been the golden child in our family. My parents doted on him endlessly, and I was always expected to be the responsible one while he got to be the fun, reckless, and charming kid who never faced any consequences. I love my brother, but he's never really had to work hard for anything. When our parents passed away unexpectedly last year, it was devastating. They left behind their house, a modest but well-kept place in a nice neighborhood, and a small amount of savings. The will, to my absolute shock, stated that the house was to go entirely to me. The savings were split evenly, but the house, which is by far the most valuable asset, was left in my name alone. Jake was furious. He assumed we would be splitting everything 50-50 and accused me of manipulating our parents into favoring me. But the truth is, I never had any idea they would do this. I always assumed the house would be divided between us or sold and split. But in the will, my parents specifically wrote that they were giving the house to me because they believed I would take care of it, and because they worried Jake would either sell it immediately or lose it due to bad financial decisions. And honestly, they weren't wrong. Jake has never held a steady job for longer than a year, and he's constantly blowing through money, either on get-rich-quick schemes or just being reckless. Meanwhile, I work my ass off to build a stable life. I have a steady job, a long-term girlfriend, and I was even renting a small apartment at the time. So, inheriting the house actually changed my life significantly. Jake, on the other hand, had been living with my parents rent-free for years. So when they passed, he expected to continue living there. I told him I wasn't going to kick him out immediately, but that we needed to figure out a plan. I was willing to give him several months to find a job in a new place, but he just kept pushing it off. 6 months in, he was still living there, barely contributing, and acting like the house was still his. I finally put my foot down and told him he needed to move out. That's when things got really ugly. He said I was stealing from him, that I was a heartless bastard, and that I was betraying our family. He tried to rally our extended family to his side, but it was pretty split. Some relatives agreed that it was unfair for me to have the house entirely, while others said our parents had a reason for their decision and that Jake needed to grow up. Jake refused to leave until I legally evicted him. It was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do, but he gave me no choice. He refused any compromises, wouldn't consider moving into a smaller place with help from a share of the savings, and just kept insisting that I was in the wrong. Now, months later, he barely speaks to me. When he does, it's to throw jabs about how I ruined his life or took everything from him. He's currently couch surfing with friends and still struggling to get a job. Meanwhile, I've been working on fixing up the house, and honestly, it feels like home. But I can't shake the guilt. I keep wondering if I should have just given him half or let him stay longer. AITA, if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps the content grow and motivates me to create even more awesome videos. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any new uploads. Thanks for your support. AITA for refusing to let my unemployed brother move in with me after he trashed our parents' house. I, 32M, own a house that I worked my ass off to afford. I didn't come from money. Our parents were working class, and I put myself through school, worked 2 jobs, and lived on the bare minimum to buy my own place. It's not a mansion, but it's mine. My younger brother, Ben, 27M, is a completely different story. Our parents enabled him his entire life. He was always the kid who got out of trouble, who got bailed out, who never faced the consequences of anything. He barely graduated high school, never held a job for longer than a few months, and has been bouncing around doing side hustles that never actually pay off. For the past year, he was living with our parents after his last job fell through. They let him live there rent-free, eat their food, and pretty much do nothing all day. My parents, especially my mom, always defended him, saying he just needs time to figure things out. Well, last month, my parents went on a long-awaited vacation for their anniversary. They were gone for 2 weeks, and they made one simple request: don't trash the house. They even left him money for groceries and basic needs, just so he wouldn't have an excuse to do anything stupid. Of course, the moment they left, Ben turned the place into a frat house. He threw multiple parties, invited God knows how many people over, and let them wreck everything. My parents came home to find their house absolutely destroyed. Broken furniture, stained carpets, a shattered TV, missing valuables, and even a hole punched through one of the walls. It looked like a crime scene. My mom called me in tears, and my dad was beyond furious. They told Ben to pack his stuff and get out. For the first time in his life, they actually set a boundary with him. They were done. And guess who he called next? Me. He showed up at my doorstep, acting all pitiful, saying he had nowhere to go and that family is supposed to help family. He promised he'd get a job soon and that he wouldn't be a burden. I shut that down immediately. I told him that he had a golden opportunity living with our parents rent-free, and he still managed to screw it up. I wasn't about to let him do the same to my house. He begged, saying it was just for a little while, and I told him he needed to figure something else out. He got pissed and said I was being heartless. Then my mom called, saying I should let him stay with me because he's still my brother. I asked her why she was suddenly okay with him staying in someone else's house when she just kicked him out of hers. She said it was different because she couldn't handle it anymore, but that I was more responsible and could keep him in line. I told her that's not my job. If he wasn't responsible enough to respect her home, why should I trust him with mine? She said she understood, but was clearly upset. Then Ben started spreading the story to other family members, making it sound like I was leaving him to be homeless just because I never liked him. I've been getting messages from cousins and an aunt telling me I should just help him out because family supports each other. I don't think I'm in the wrong here, but it's starting to get to me. AITA for refusing to let him move in? AITA for refusing to help my sister after she destroyed my property? So I, 29M, have an older sister, Lisa, 34F, who has always been the type to get whatever she wants. Growing up, our parents bent over backward to accommodate her, excusing her behavior as just being spirited or opinionated. Meanwhile, I was always expected to be the responsible one, the peacemaker, the one who understood Lisa's outbursts. Lisa has had a tough time as an adult, though. She's had a string of failed jobs, partly because she has a habit of burning bridges and refusing to take accountability. She's also been in and out of relationships, most of them ending dramatically, and she's always moving from place to place. Meanwhile, I worked hard, went to college, and built a stable career. A few years ago, I bought a small but nice house in a quiet neighborhood. It's nothing fancy, but it's mine, and I take pride in it. Lisa, on the other hand, has been struggling financially. A few months ago, she called me in tears, saying she had nowhere to go because her latest breakup left her without a place to stay. She begged me to let her crash with me for a while until she figured things out. I was hesitant because, well, I know Lisa, but she promised it would just be for a couple of months, and against my better judgment, I agreed. Big mistake. Lisa moved in and immediately made herself at home in the worst way possible. She left messes everywhere, used my things without asking, and even brought random people over without letting me know. She also had a habit of borrowing money from me, never large amounts, but enough that it added up. Whenever I brought it up, she would guilt-trip me, saying I had a good job and that she was just trying to get back on her feet. Then came the breaking point. I have a hobby, woodworking. It's something I picked up a few years ago, and I've built quite a few pieces of furniture for my house. I even have a small workshop in my garage with tools that I've spent years collecting. Some of them are expensive, and a few were gifts from my late grandfather, who was the one who first got me into woodworking. Those hold a lot of sentimental value for me. One day, I came home to find my workshop completely trashed. Tools were scattered everywhere, wood was broken, and some of my completed projects were damaged. I was furious and confronted Lisa. She acted like it was no big deal and casually admitted that she had let one of her new friends use my workshop because he wanted to try building something. I lost it. I told her she had no right to let some random person use my tools and that she had completely disrespected my space. She rolled her eyes and told me I was overreacting. She even had the audacity to say, "You're always so uptight about your stupid hobby. It's just wooden tools, not like it's your job or something." That was it for me. I told her she had a week to find another place because I was done. She acted like I was the worst person in the world, crying about how I was abandoning her and how I didn't care about family. I stood my ground, though, and by the end of the week, she was gone. That was 3 months ago. Since then, Lisa has struggled. She's been bouncing between friends' couches and short-term rentals, and now she's reached out again. She says she has nowhere else to go and begged me to let her move back in, promising she'd be different this time. Our parents are also pressuring me, saying that family helps family and that I should be more forgiving. But I can't do it. I don't trust her to respect my space, and I refuse to let her destroy my home again. I told her no, and now she and my parents are calling me heartless. My mom even said, "One day, when you need help, you'll regret turning your back on your sister." I feel guilty, but I also know what will happen if I let her back in. AITA? AITA for refusing to help my sister after she destroyed my property? So I, 29M, have an older sister, Lisa, 34F, who has always been the type to get whatever she wants. Growing up, our parents bent over backward to accommodate her, excusing her behavior as just being spirited or opinionated. Meanwhile, I was always expected to be the responsible one, the peacemaker, the one who understood Lisa's outbursts. Lisa has had a tough time as an adult, though. She's had a string of failed jobs, partly because she has a habit of burning bridges and refusing to take accountability. She's also been in and out of relationships, most of them ending dramatically, and she's always moving from place to place. Meanwhile, I worked hard, went to college, and built a stable career. A few years ago, I bought a small but nice house in a quiet neighborhood. It's nothing fancy, but it's mine, and I take pride in it. Lisa, on the other hand, has been struggling financially. A few months ago, she called me in tears, saying she had nowhere to go because her latest breakup left her without a place to stay. She begged me to let her crash with me for a while until she figured things out. I was hesitant because, well, I know Lisa, but she promised it would just be for a couple of months, and against my better judgment, I agreed. Big mistake. Lisa moved in and immediately made herself at home in the worst way possible. She left messes everywhere, used my things without asking, and even brought random people over without letting me know. She also had a habit of borrowing money from me, never large amounts, but enough that it added up. Whenever I brought it up, she would guilt-trip me, saying I had a good job and that she was just trying to get back on her feet. Then came the breaking point. I have a hobby, woodworking. It's something I picked up a few years ago, and I've built quite a few pieces of furniture for my house. I even have a small workshop in my garage with tools that I've spent years collecting. Some of them are expensive, and a few were gifts from my late grandfather, who was the one who first got me into woodworking. Those hold a lot of sentimental value for me. One day, I came home to find my workshop completely trashed. Tools were scattered everywhere, wood was broken, and some of my completed projects were damaged. I was furious and confronted Lisa. She acted like it was no big deal and casually admitted that she had let one of her new friends use my workshop because he wanted to try building something. I lost it. I told her she had no right to let some random person use my tools and that she had completely disrespected my space. She rolled her eyes and told me I was overreacting. She even had the audacity to say, "You're always so uptight about your stupid hobby. It's just wooden tools, not like it's your job or something." That was it for me. I told her she had a week to find another place because I was done. She acted like I was the worst person in the world, crying about how I was abandoning her and how I didn't care about family. I stood my ground, though, and by the end of the week, she was gone. That was 3 months ago. Since then, Lisa has struggled. She's been bouncing between friends' couches and short-term rentals, and now she's reached out again. She says she has nowhere else to go and begged me to let her move back in, promising she'd be different this time. Our parents are also pressuring me, saying that family helps family and that I should be more forgiving. But I can't do it. I don't trust her to respect my space, and I refuse to let her destroy my home again. I told her no, and now she and my parents are calling me heartless. My mom even said, "One day, when you need help, you'll regret turning your back on your sister." I feel guilty, but I also know what will happen if I let her back in. AITA? AITA for refusing to bail out my friend after he got himself fired? I, 31M, have been friends with Mark, 30M, since high school. We were never best friends, but we hung out in the same group and stayed in touch over the years. Mark has always been a bit of a screw-up, not in a malicious way, but in a never-takes-life-seriously kind of way. He's the kind of guy who always has some new plan to make money fast, but never follows through. Meanwhile, I took a different path. I worked my way through college, built a stable career in IT, and bought my own house a couple of years ago. I'm not rich, but I'm comfortable, and I'm proud of the life I've built. Mark, on the other hand, has had a string of dead-end jobs, mostly because he either quits when he gets bored or gets fired for slacking off. He's always had an attitude of jobs are temporary. Life is meant to be enjoyed. Which, fine, live your life how you want, but that attitude has burned him more times than I can count. A few months ago, Mark landed what I thought was a decent job. It was an entry-level office position, nothing fancy, but it paid well enough and had benefits. For the first time in years, he seemed like he was getting his life together. He even talked about getting his own apartment instead of bouncing between friends' places. Then, a few weeks ago, Mark got fired. When I asked him what happened, he laughed and said he got caught messing around. Turns out, he was showing up late, taking 2-hour lunches, and basically doing the bare minimum. He also told me, like it was a funny story, that he had gotten into an argument with his boss after being confronted about his performance. Apparently, he called a guy a corporate drone with a stick up his ass before storming out. I told him flat out that he screwed up. He just shrugged and said, "That job sucked anyway. I was planning to quit soon." But then, a few days later, he started hinting at needing a place to crash for a little while. I shut that down immediately. I knew exactly what would happen. He'd move in, make himself comfortable, and suddenly a little while would turn into months. I told him I wasn't in a position to take in a roommate, especially someone who wasn't even trying to be responsible. That's when he got pissed. He told me I was supposed to be his friend and that friends help each other. I told him friends also tell each other the truth. And the truth is he keeps screwing up his own life and expecting other people to pick up the pieces. He called me a selfish asshole and accused me of looking down on him just because I have a stable job and a house. He also said I was hoarding my success instead of sharing it with people who needed it more. Since then, he's been trash-talking me to our mutual friends, painting me as some greedy, ungrateful jerk who abandoned him in his time of need. Some of them think I was too harsh and should have at least let him stay for a little while. Others agree that he brought this on himself. Now I'm wondering, was I too cold? Should I have just helped him out temporarily? AITA? AITA for refusing to give my late grandfather's house to my cousin, even though he needs it more. I, 34 am, inherited my grandfather's house after he passed away 2 years ago. It wasn't some enormous mansion, just a comfortable, well-maintained home in a decent neighborhood. My grandfather and I were always close. He practically raised me after my dad passed away when I was 10, and I spent most of my childhood in that house. When he passed, he left a clear and legal will stating that I was to inherit the house. The rest of the family got money, jewelry, and sentimental items, but the house was explicitly mine. This caused some resentment, especially from my cousin Jake, 31M, and his parents, my uncle and aunt. Jake and I grew up together, but were never particularly close. He was always reckless, constantly getting into trouble, and had a sense of entitlement that our grandparents tried to curb but never quite succeeded. He barely worked, hopped from one job to another, and constantly had financial problems, usually because of bad decisions like gambling or getting into get-rich-quick schemes. After my grandfather passed, Jake and his parents immediately started making comments like, "It would make sense for Jake to have the house since he's starting a family, and you don't need a house, but Jake could really use the help." At the time, I shut it down by reminding them that it was not up for discussion. It was my house, left to me by our grandfather's choice. Fast forward to now, Jake and his wife just had their second kid, and they are struggling financially. They live in a small apartment and are constantly behind on rent. Last month, my uncle called me and said it was time to do the right thing and give the house to Jake. Not sell it to him. Give it to him. His reasoning? Jake has a family, and you're single with no kids, so you don't need a whole house to yourself. I was stunned. I told him that wasn't happening and that my grandfather's was clear. My uncle got frustrated and said, Grandpa only left it to you because he thought you needed it at the time, but things have changed. He wanted to go to family that needs it more. I told him that was complete nonsense. If our grandfather had wanted Jake to have the house, he would have put it in the will. The conversation ended with my uncle calling me selfish and telling me I was hoarding resources that could help family. A few days later, Jake called me himself, at first acting like he wanted to have a civil conversation, but quickly turned into guilt tripping. He kept saying things like, "You don't even have kids, man. What do you need a house for?" And it's just sitting there while my family is struggling to make ends meet. For the record, I do live in the house. I take care of it, pay the property taxes, and keep up with maintenance. It's not just sitting there, as they keep claiming. I told Jake that his poor financial decisions were not my responsibility. He exploded, calling me selfish and heartless, saying I was watching my own cousin suffer while I lived in luxury alone. I hung up, but then the real nightmare started. My aunt, uncle, and even a few other relatives started bombarding me with messages about how I was being unfair, how family helps family, and how I was a terrible person for letting my cousin and his kids struggle while I had more than I needed. Even my mom, who had mostly stayed out of it before, gently suggested that maybe I could at least let them stay there for a while until they get back on their feet. I told her absolutely not. I knew Jake well enough to know that if I let him move in temporarily, he would never leave. And if I ever try to make him, the family would paint me as a villain. Now, half my family is treating me like I'm some kind of greedy monster for not giving up my house. Some of my friends think I should consider letting them stay for a while, but I don't think I owe them anything. So, Reddit, AITA for refusing to give my cousin the house my grandfather left to me? AITA for refusing to let my parents move in after they spent years treating me like a failure? I, 33M, grew up in a household where academic success was the only thing that mattered. My parents, especially my dad, were obsessed with status, grades, schools, careers. My older brother, Eric, 36M, fit their mold perfectly. He was always the top student, got into an Ivy League school, and became a high-earning corporate lawyer. He was the golden child. Me? Not so much. I struggled in school. Not because I wasn't smart, but because I didn't care about the things they wanted me to. I loved working with my hands, fixing things, figuring out how machines worked. I barely scraped through high school, and when I told my parents I wanted to go into a trade instead of college, they acted like I told them I was planning to live under a bridge. My dad called me a failure. My mom cried. They told me I was throwing my life away and that I'd regret it. When I refused to change my mind, they basically cut me off. They didn't kick me out, but they made it clear I wasn't one of them anymore. They stopped paying attention to me, didn't support my decisions, and even told family members that they were ashamed of me. So I left. I worked my ass off, got into an apprenticeship, and eventually became a licensed electrician. It wasn't easy, but I loved what I was doing, and I was making good money. Meanwhile, Eric followed the path they wanted: big job, big house, fancy lifestyle. My parents bragged about him constantly, while they barely acknowledged me. Over the years, my relationship with them was distant but civil. They never outright apologized for how they treated me, but they occasionally made passive-aggressive comments about my wasted potential. I mostly ignored it and built my own life. Fast forward to last year. I bought my own house, not a mansion, but a nice, solid place that I renovated myself. I was proud of it. I invited my parents over, hoping maybe they'd finally see that I was doing well. Instead, my dad looked around and said, "Well, it's not much, but I guess it's yours." My mom asked if I was sure I was financially stable. It was like they still couldn't accept that I had built a good life without their approval. Then, a few months ago, everything changed. Eric's perfect life collapsed. Turns out he had been living way beyond his means. Massive mortgage, luxury cars, private school for his kids. And when he lost his job, it all fell apart. He had no savings, tons of debt, and no backup plan. My parents, who had always relied on him to take care of them in their old age, suddenly found themselves with no financial support. So guess who they turned to? They showed up at my door, practically begging me to let them move in. They couldn't afford their house anymore and needed a little help until they got back on their feet. My dad, who had spent years looking down on me, suddenly acted like we were best friends. My mom kept saying, "Family takes care of each other." I said no. I told them that for years, they treated me like a disappointment. They never supported me, never respected me, and only now, when they had nowhere else to go, did they finally see me as worthy. I said I wasn't going to be their backup plan just because their favorite son let them down. They were furious. My dad called me ungrateful. My mom cried, saying she never thought I could be so cruel. Eric even called me, saying I was being petty and that we all needed to come together during this tough time. I told him that was easy for him to say. He was the one who got everything handed to him while I had to fight for everything I have. Now, half the family is on my case. Some say I'm justified. Others say I'm being too harsh. A few relatives even told me I should be grateful that my parents gave me life and that refusing them now is heartless. But I don't feel heartless. I feel like they made their choice years ago, and now they have to live with it. AITA? AITA for refusing to give my brother the money he thinks he's owed after our parents' deaths? I, 35M, lost both of my parents in a tragic accident 3 years ago. It was sudden and devastating. My younger brother, Kevin, 32M, and I were left to handle everything, including their estate. My parents weren't wealthy, but they were smart with their money. They owned their home outright, had some savings, and had life insurance policies. Here's where things got complicated. My parents left a will that split everything evenly between Kevin and me. 50-50, no special conditions. However, there was one major factor. I was named the executor. This was mainly because Kevin has never been responsible with money. Since we were kids, he was always reckless, maxing out credit cards, getting into debt, and constantly borrowing money without repaying it. My parents bailed him out multiple times, even paying off his student loans when he dropped out of college. They hoped he'd get his act together, but he never did. When they passed, Kevin immediately assumed we'd just sell everything and split the cash. But I knew our parents wanted things handled properly. The house wasn't in bad shape, but it needed work before selling, and there were debts and funeral costs to cover first. I told Kevin I would handle the finances responsibly, and he'd get his full share once everything was settled. Kevin did not like that. He wanted his money immediately. He demanded I sell the house as is to get quick cash, but that would have meant taking a huge loss. When I refused, he threw a fit, accusing me of trying to cheat him. I told him I was following the will and that I had no intention of keeping anything from him. For the next few months, I dealt with all the responsibilities alone, paying off remaining debts, handling legal matters, and overseeing necessary repairs to maximize the home's value. Kevin, meanwhile, did nothing except call me constantly asking when he'd get paid. He even asked if I could just give him my half immediately and take the risk myself. I refused. Fast forward a year, and I finally sold the house for a great price, far more than we would have gotten had we rushed it. After all expenses, we each walked away with a substantial amount. I wired Kevin his full half down to the cent. I thought that would be the end of it. Nope. Kevin called me the next day, furious. He claimed he deserved more because I delayed the process and wasted time when he needed money. He said if I'd just sold it earlier, he could have used the money to invest, which, knowing him, meant blowing it on some get-rich-quick scheme. He even tried to argue that because I handled all the work, I must have taken extra money for myself, despite me showing him all the paperwork. I was done. I told him he got exactly what our parents left him, and if he was too irresponsible to manage it, that wasn't my problem. He started ranting about how I always act superior, how I never struggled like he did, which isn't true. I just managed my life better, and how our parents would have wanted me to take care of him. I reminded him that our parents did take care of him, and this was what they left him, nothing more, nothing less. Now, Kevin isn't speaking to me, and my aunt, his enabler, keeps telling me I should have given him extra since I was more financially stable. I disagree. I did everything fairly and by the book. So, AITA for refusing to give Kevin more than what he was actually owed? AITA for refusing to give my dad money after he abandoned me. Even though he's now sick, I, 32M, was raised by my mom after my dad walked out when I was 10. My parents had a messy divorce, and my dad basically checked out of my life after that. He moved across the country, started a new family, and had 2 more kids. He never made an effort to see me and only called on birthdays, sometimes. Child support was inconsistent, and my mom worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat. Growing up, I resented him. I was angry that he got to start fresh while my mom and I struggled. He never came to my school events, never visited on holidays, and never showed up when I needed him. When I turned 18, I decided I was done trying. I stopped answering his occasional calls and focused on my own life. I put myself through college with scholarships, part-time jobs, and student loans. I worked hard, built a career in finance, and now I'm in a good place. I have a comfortable apartment, a solid income, and stability, things I never had growing up. A few months ago, out of nowhere, my dad's wife, not even my dad himself, messaged me on Facebook. She said my dad was very sick, some kind of serious heart condition, and they were struggling with medical bills. She went on about how expensive treatment was, how they were at risk of losing their home, and how my dad deeply regretted not being in my life. Then she asked if I could help financially. I was stunned. Not once in the past 22 years had my father reached out to make amends. No apologies, no attempts to reconnect, nothing. But now that he needed money, suddenly I existed? I responded with a simple, "I'm sorry he's sick, but I can't help." She saw the message but didn't reply. A week later, I got a call from an unknown number. It was my dad. He sounded weak, and at first, I felt a little bad. But then he started talking about the past being the past and how family should help each other. He told me he made mistakes, but hoped I could look past them because he really needed me now. I asked him outright why he never tried to fix things before. Why, after 2 decades, was he only reaching out now? He stumbled over his words, saying he was young and stupid, and that he thought I was better off without him. I told him that might have been true back then, but he had years to change his mind. Years to call, visit, apologize, do anything to show he cared. But he didn't. And now that he was desperate, I was supposed to forget all that? He started crying, saying he was scared and didn't know what else to do, that his wife and kids were suffering too, and I was the only one who could help, that if I didn't, they could lose everything. I won't lie, I felt a pang of guilt, but I also felt angry. He left my mom to struggle alone. He left me to grow up without a father. He built a new life and never looked back. I told him I hoped he got the help he needed, but that I wasn't the solution. Then I hung up. Since then, I've been getting messages from his wife, his kids, who I don't even know, and even some distant relatives. They all say I'm being cruel, that I should be the bigger person, and that this isn't about the past, it's about saving a life. Even my mom, who supports me completely, admitted she feels bad for him. I keep asking myself, if he had been a decent father, would I have helped? Probably. But he wasn't. And now, I don't think I owe him anything. So, AITA for refusing to help the father who abandoned me. AITA for refusing to reconnect with my former best friend after he ruined my life. I, 32M, had a best friend, Jason, 32M, for most of my life. We met in elementary school and were inseparable through high school and college. We had the kind of friendship people dream about. Inside jokes, late-night talks, and years of memories. I thought we'd be friends forever. Jason was always the charismatic one, the guy everyone liked. I was quieter, more reserved, but I never minded because I thought our friendship was built on mutual respect. We had different ambitions. He was all about social climbing and networking, while I wanted a stable career in engineering. But despite our differences, I trusted him completely. That trust was a mistake. About 6 years ago, I was engaged to my ex, Sarah, 30F. We had been together for 4 years and were planning our wedding. She and Jason got along well, which I thought was great at the time. I liked that my best friend and my fiancé were close. What I didn't realize was that they were too close. 3 months before the wedding, I got a gut feeling that something was off. Sarah was distant, Jason was acting weird, and little things didn't add up. One night, I checked Sarah's phone while she was asleep. I know, breach of privacy, but I felt like I was losing my mind. What I found shattered me. She and Jason had been having an affair for over a year. Reading through the messages, I saw how they laughed about me behind my back. Jason called me boring and said I was too much of a nice guy to ever see it coming. Sarah said she loved me, but that she felt a real connection with him. They had planned to wait until after the wedding to tell me, so Sarah could have financial security before dumping me. I confronted them immediately. Sarah cried, begged, and said it was a mistake. Jason? He shrugged and said, "You wouldn't have kept her happy anyway, man. No remorse, no guilt, just that smug look I had ignored for years." The wedding was obviously called off. My world crumbled. I spiraled into depression, struggled at work, and lost a lot of friends. Turns out, Jason had been poisoning people against me before I even knew about the affair. Some mutual friends took his side, believing his narrative that I was controlling and not good for Sarah. I ended up moving to another city just to escape it all. Fast forward to now. Life is better. I have a great job, a solid group of friends, and a girlfriend who actually loves and respects me. I haven't thought about Jason in years. Then, out of nowhere, I get a message from him. It was long and dramatic, saying he had messed up and had grown as a person. He and Sarah didn't even last a year. She cheated on him, shock, and he realized how much he had betrayed me. He wanted to meet up, reconnect, and fix things. I didn't respond. Then he started calling. He left voicemails saying he missed me, that he needed his best friend back. He even got a few old friends to message me, saying he was a different person now and I should at least hear him out. I refused. I told him I had no interest in rekindling anything with him. He made his choice years ago, and I moved on. Now people are saying I'm being too harsh. That time heals all wounds, and that since I'm happy now, I should let go of the past. My girlfriend supports my decision, but a few friends think I should at least talk to him. I don't feel like I owe him anything. AITA? AITA for refusing to give up my promotion to my coworker who needs it more. I, 30M, work at a mid-sized company in a competitive industry. I've been with this company for 6 years, steadily working my way up. I've put in countless late nights, taken on extra projects, and consistently outperformed expectations. My hard work paid off recently when I was offered a major promotion to a managerial position. It comes with a significant salary increase, better benefits, and more responsibility. I was thrilled. However, the moment the promotion was announced, things got messy. One of my co-workers, Dan, 35M, approached me privately, congratulated me in a half-hearted way, and then asked if I would consider declining the promotion so that he could have it instead. I was completely caught off guard. Dan and I aren't close, but we've always been friendly. He's been at the company longer than I have, 9 years. But while he's a decent worker, he's not particularly ambitious. He clocks in and out at the exact scheduled times, doesn't take on extra responsibilities, and has never shown interest in leadership roles before. When I asked him why he thought I should step aside, he got emotional and said that he needed this promotion more than I did. He explained that he has 3 kids, a mortgage, and his wife recently lost her job. Money is tight for him, and this promotion would make a huge difference for his family. He said that since I'm single with no kids and already financially comfortable, I should do the right thing and let him have it. I told him I was sorry for his situation, but that I had earned this promotion through hard work and wasn't going to give it up. He got frustrated and said, "You don't need it like I do. You'll be fine either way, but for me, this could change everything." I stood my ground and told him that seniority alone doesn't entitle him to the position and that our boss chose me for a reason. I reminded him that nothing was stopping him from working toward a promotion himself in the future. He left looking extremely disappointed. I thought that was the end of it, but apparently, he went around telling people about our conversation. Soon, I started getting side-eye from some coworkers, and a few even told me I should consider giving Dan the promotion because he has a family to support. One coworker said, "You'll have other opportunities, but Dan really needs this one." Even my boss pulled me aside after hearing the gossip and asked if I wanted to turn down the offer. I reassured him that I absolutely did not, and thankfully he backed me up. Still, the whole thing has left a bad taste in my mouth. I worked my ass off for this, and I feel like I'm being guilt-tripped for not sacrificing my own success for someone else's personal situation. So, AITA for refusing to give up my promotion to a coworker who needs it more. AITA for refusing to forgive my brother after what he did to me as a kid. I, 30M, have an older brother, Jake, 35M, who was the golden child growing up. Our parents weren't bad people, but they clearly favored Jake. He was the smart, charming, athletic kid who could do no wrong, while I was the quieter, more awkward one who always got the short end of the stick. If Jake and I ever got into a fight, I was the one punished. If something broke in a house, I was the one blamed. If he wanted something, he got it first. But the worst part wasn't just the favoritism. It was the way Jake treated me. He was a bully, plain and simple. Not the kind of bully who throws punches, at least not often, but the kind who gets into your head and makes you feel worthless. He constantly put me down, made fun of me in front of his friends, and turned everything into a competition he had to win. The worst thing he ever did happened when I was 12 and he was 17. We had a dog, Max. He was my dog. I picked him out from the shelter, I took care of him, and he was my best friend. One day, I came home from school to find Max missing. My parents told me he had run away, but I didn't believe it. Max never tried to escape before. It took me 2 years to find out the truth. Jake let it slip during an argument when he was drunk. He had let Max out on purpose. He thought it would be funny to see me cry. I was devastated. I confronted my parents, and they admitted they knew but didn't want to tell me because what was done was done. I never looked at Jake the same way after that. When I moved out at 18, I went low contact. I never told him why outright, but I think he always knew. I didn't go to his college graduation, I didn't congratulate him on his wedding, and when he had his first kid, I sent a polite congrats text and nothing more. I kept it civil at family gatherings, but I never let him back in. Now, all these years later, Jake is suddenly desperate to fix things. His wife left him, he's struggling financially, and he's realized that I'm the only person in the family who hasn't bailed him out. He called me last month, saying he was reflecting on the past and wanted to reconnect. He admitted to what he did to Max and said he was just a stupid kid who didn't realize the consequences of his actions. I told him, flat out, that I didn't want to reconnect, that I had made peace with what happened, but that didn't mean I wanted him in my life. He started crying, actual, full-on crying, and said he had changed, that he was trying to be a better person, and that he needed family now more than ever. I still said no. Now, my parents are involved, saying I need to let the past go, and that Jake has suffered enough. They told me I was being petty and cruel, that we're brothers and should support each other no matter what. Even some extended family have reached out, telling me that family is family, and that I should be the bigger person. But I can't do it. I don't hate Jake anymore. I don't even wish him harm. But I also don't trust him, don't respect him, and don't want to be close to him. I feel like I made peace with this part of my life a long time ago, and I don't want to reopen old wounds just because now he's decided to change. AITA? AITA for refusing to help my dad after he ruined my mom's life? I, 31M, have been low contact with my dad, 58M, for most of my adult life. Growing up, my parents' marriage was a complete disaster, and almost all of it was my dad's fault. He wasn't physically abusive, but he was a selfish, emotionally neglectful husband who treated my mom, 56F, like a servant. My mom was the kindest, most hardworking person I knew. She worked full-time while also handling 100% of the housework, cooking, and parenting. My dad, on the other hand, did nothing. He barely worked, constantly jumping from job to job because he either got fired or quit when he got bored. He always had some excuse. His bosses were idiots. His co-workers were lazy. The company didn't respect his talent. Meanwhile, my mom was working herself to the bone to keep a roof over our heads. To make matters worse, my dad treated my mom like she was beneath him. He belittled her, made fun of her interests, and constantly acted like he was too good for the life they had. He would spend money on stupid things, get-rich-quick schemes, expensive gadgets, random hobbies, while my mom stressed about bills. He blamed her whenever we struggled financially, even though he was the one who refused to hold down a job. Things finally blew up when I was 16. My mom discovered he had been cheating on her with a woman he met online. It wasn't a one-time thing. He had been seeing this woman for years behind my mom's back. And the worst part? When my mom confronted him, he laughed at her face. He told her she was boring and that she should have been grateful he stayed as long as he did. She finally filed for divorce. And let me tell you, it was ugly. My dad fought her every step of the way, not because he wanted to stay married, but because he didn't want to pay alimony. He tried to take the house, the car, everything. My mom, who had sacrificed everything for him, had to fight just to get what she was rightfully owed. Even then, she was left with way less than she deserved. After the divorce, my dad completely checked out of my life. He moved in with the woman he cheated with, barely called, and only reached out when he needed something. Meanwhile, my mom worked multiple jobs to keep things stable for me. I will never forget how hard she fought to make sure I had a good life despite everything he put her through. For the past decade, my relationship with my dad has been minimal. He occasionally reaches out, usually with some half-assed, "How have you been?" before asking for money or a favor. I always shut him down. I'm polite but firm. I don't hate him, but I don't respect him either. Then, last month, I got a call from my dad. He was in full panic mode. Turns out, the woman he left my mom for just dumped him. She took most of his money, left him in debt, and kicked him out of their apartment. He had nowhere to go and no one to turn to. He was practically begging me to let him stay with me just for a little while until he got back on his feet. I said no. I told him that he made his choices, and now he had to deal with the consequences. He started crying, crying, saying he was too old to start over and that family takes care of each other. I told him family does take care of each other. Mom took care of me. He didn't. He never once cared about my well-being unless it benefited him. Now, he's telling everyone I'm a cruel, heartless son who abandoned his father in his time of need. Some relatives are siding with him, saying that no matter what, he's still my dad and I should help him. Even my mom, who has every reason to hate him, told me she doesn't want me to carry resentment forever and that I should at least consider helping him. But I just can't. I don't feel anything for him anymore. I'm not angry. I'm not bitter. I just don't care. He made his bed, and now he has to lie in it. AITA for refusing to let my friend move in after he lost his apartment. Even though I have a spare room, I, 33M, have a close friend, Brian, 34M, who I've known since college. We were roommates back in the day, and while we had our differences, we always got along well enough. After college, we went our separate ways career-wise, but we stayed in touch. Over the years, I worked hard, built a stable career, and eventually bought a house. Brian, on the other hand, has always had trouble holding down a steady job. He's bounced between different gigs, often quitting because he didn't like the work environment or wasn't feeling it anymore. Brian has always lived in apartments with roommates or short-term leases. He's never been great with money, but I never judge him for it, until recently. A couple of months ago, he called me in a panic. He had been evicted from his apartment because he had fallen behind on rent. He said he had nowhere to go and asked if he could crash at my place just for a few weeks while he figured things out. Here's the thing, I do have a spare room. Financially, I could afford to let him stay. But I also know Brian. I know his patterns. He's the kind of guy who says just a few weeks and ends up staying for months, if not years. He has a history of overstaying his welcome with other friends, and I knew if I let him in, I'd have a hard time getting him to leave. So I told him no. I wasn't rude about it. I said I was really sorry for his situation, but I didn't think it was a good idea. I offered to help him look for affordable short-term rentals. Even said I'd lend him some money for a motel while he got back on his feet. But I made it clear that moving in with me wasn't an option. Brian flipped out. He started ranting about how I was supposed to be his friend, how I had all this space while he had nothing, and how I was letting him be homeless just because I didn't feel like helping. I reminded him that I was offering help, just not in the way he wanted. But he wasn't having it. He hung up on me. And the next thing I knew, mutual friends were messaging me, asking why I was letting Brian sleep in his car when I had a whole house to myself. Apparently, Brian had been telling people that I refused to help him at all, making it sound like I just coldly turned my back on him. I had to explain to multiple people that I did offer help, just not the kind where I let Brian move in indefinitely and mooch off me until I had to force him out. Since then, Brian has been couch surfing with other friends, and the guilt tripping hasn't stopped. Some people are on my side, saying it's my house and my decision, but others think I'm being unnecessarily harsh. One even said, if the roles were reversed, Brian would definitely take you in. But I honestly don't believe that. Brian has always been the kind of guy who takes, but rarely gives. So, AITA for refusing to let my friend move in, even though I have the space. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss new videos. Also, leave a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Your support and engagement mean a lot to me. See you in the next video. AITA for refusing to help my brother after he lost everything, even though I could easily afford to. So a little backstory. I, 34M, have an older brother, Mark, 37M. Growing up, we were close, but things started changing when he hit his late teens. Mark was always the golden child in my parents' eyes. Charismatic, athletic, and destined for greatness, while I was the quiet, bookish one who preferred computers and video games. Mark was the kind of guy who coasted through life on charm alone. He had that natural ability to make people like him, and for a long time, that worked in his favor. He never had to try too hard because someone would always pick up the slack for him, usually our parents. Meanwhile, I had to fight for everything. I put myself through college with scholarships and a part-time job, while Mark, who never took school seriously, ended up dropping out of college after 2 years because he was bored. He bounced from job to job while our parents supported him, covered his rent, and even bought him a new car when his old one broke down. I, on the other hand, worked my ass off, landed a good job in tech, and eventually started my own company. I won't pretend I didn't get lucky along the way, but I also sacrificed a lot. Long nights, missed social events, and years of grinding before my company finally took off. Now, I'm financially comfortable. Not crazy rich, but I own my house, have no debt, and live a pretty good life. Mark, however, never changed. He jumped from one big idea to the next, always chasing some get-rich-quick scheme or revolutionary startup idea that never panned out. Our parents kept bailing him out until they couldn't anymore. They passed away a few years ago, and suddenly, Mark was on his own. At first, he did okay. He got married, had a kid, and seemed to be settling down. But then he made a huge investment in some crypto nonsense that crashed. He lost everything. His savings, his house, even his wife, who left him and took their son with her. Now he's couch surfing with friends, unemployed and desperate. And that's where I come in. A couple of weeks ago, Mark called me. He was in full crisis mode, saying he had nowhere else to turn and asking if he could crash at my place for just a few months while he got back on his feet. He also asked if I could lend him some money to invest in his next project, which he swore was a guaranteed success. I said no, not because I can't afford it. I could, but because I know Mark. I know how this story goes. He'd move in, promise it was temporary, and then 6 months later, he'd still be sitting on my couch, talking about his next big break. I'd end up supporting him while he did nothing to actually fix his situation. So I told him, I'm sorry you're in this position, but I can't help you financially. You need to get a real job and figure this out. He exploded. He called me a selfish asshole, accused me of looking down on him, and said that I, of all people, should understand how hard it is to make it in life. He even threw our parents in my face, saying they would be ashamed of me for turning my back on family. I stood my ground. I told him I'd help him job hunt, even let him use my address for job applications, but he needed to put in the effort. He scoffed and said he wasn't going to work some demeaning 9 to 5 like a loser. That was 2 weeks ago. Since then, mutual friends and even some extended family members have been reaching out, saying I'm being cruel. That Mark has hit rock bottom, and I should be willing to help him at least get back on his feet. Some even suggested I just let him stay with me for a while, because he's family. I feel guilty, but at the same time, I can't bring myself to enable him anymore. He's 37 years old. At some point, he has to take responsibility for his life, right? AITA? AITA for not attending my best friend's family gathering after they insulted my girlfriend? So here's the situation. I, 28M, have been dating my girlfriend, Sarah, 27F, for about 10 months. I'm really into her, and things are going well, but recently, a situation came up that's causing some tension with my best friend, Alex, 29M. Alex and I have been best friends since we were 6 years old. We've been through everything together. Elementary school, high school, college, and all the messy bits of early adulthood. He's been there for me when things were rough, and I've been there for him too. Our friendship has been rock solid, or at least that's what I thought. Now, to give you some context about my girlfriend Sarah, she's a bit more of a reserved, introverted person. She's not shy by any means, but she prefers to keep a small, tight-knit group of friends. She's also a little blunt sometimes, which can come off as rude if you don't know her well. She's a straight shooter, and while I love this about her, I've always warned people that she's not the most social butterfly in the room. Anyway, Alex invited me to his family's gathering last weekend. His family is well, let's just say they're the type of people who love loud, boisterous get-togethers with lots of jokes, drinking, and a bit of friendly teasing. I had been to a few of these gatherings in the past, and while I wasn't the biggest fan of the atmosphere, I'd always gone along to support Alex because he was my best friend. So when he invited Sarah, I didn't think much of it and figured she could meet the crew. Now, things went sideways pretty quickly. From the start, Alex's mom was all over Sarah, making all these comments about how she didn't seem to have a lot of personality and how quiet girls like her are so mysterious. I didn't think much of it initially, figuring it was just her being friendly. But as the night went on, the comments got more pointed. At one point, Alex's dad asked Sarah, "Are you always so quiet, or is it just because you're with him?" He said it with this chuckle, clearly trying to be funny. It made me uncomfortable, but I tried to brush it off. Then, during dinner, Alex's aunt started commenting on Sarah's appearance, saying things like, "You don't look like you belong in a place like this, and I bet you're just dating him for his money." Huh? It was clear they were trying to make Sarah feel uncomfortable, but she didn't take it well. Sarah, who's normally pretty calm, snapped back with something like, "I'm not here to make small talk or pretend to be something I'm not. I'm just here for Alex." She wasn't rude, but you could tell the sarcasm was starting to show. Alex's aunt didn't take kindly to this, and the mood shifted even further. Things took another turn when Alex's cousin made a comment about how Sarah wasn't the type of girl who could keep up with the family. At this point, I could see that Sarah was clearly getting pissed off, and she told me she didn't want to stay much longer. We tried to make our exit, but Alex's mom gave me this look like I was abandoning the group and making her feel bad for not having more fun. Here's where I'm torn. I confronted Alex about the way his family treated Sarah. I told him I felt like they were being rude and making her feel like she didn't belong. He didn't see it the same way. He said it was just friendly banter and that Sarah should have known how to take a joke. He even said I was too sensitive about it and that it wasn't a big deal. I told him that I thought his family crossed a line and that as my best friend, he should have stood up for Sarah. He got defensive and said that I should have just let it slide and that I was making things worse. I was pretty upset, so I told Alex I wasn't going to attend his next family gathering. I felt like his family didn't respect Sarah, and I didn't want to subject her to that again. Alex didn't take this well at all. He called me petty and said I was overreacting to everything. His words were, "If you care more about her than me, then maybe we're not as good of friends as I thought." Since then, things have been weird. Alex hasn't really spoken to me much, and I'm starting to feel like maybe I did overreact. Maybe it was just harmless teasing, and I shouldn't have made a big deal out of it. On the other hand, I really don't think Sarah deserved to be treated like that, and I stand by my decision to protect her. But now I'm getting messages from mutual friends saying that I'm being unreasonable and that Alex is hurt by the way I acted. They're saying that I'm choosing my girlfriend over a lifelong friendship and that I should have just let things go. So, AITA for refusing to attend Alex's family gathering after they insulted my girlfriend, or am I justified in sticking up for her and distancing myself from Alex? AITA for refusing to help my sister after she caused a scene at my house. I, 32M, have a younger sister, Emily, 28F, who has always been a bit difficult. Growing up, she was the type to constantly seek attention, and my parents often gave in to her tantrums, which, honestly, didn't help her behavior in the long run. As we got older, Emily's attitude didn't change, and while I love her, I've always had a hard time dealing with her. I've always been more responsible and level-headed, while Emily seems to make decisions impulsively and then expect everyone to pick up the pieces when things fall apart. It's hard for me to have patience with her sometimes, especially because she has a tendency to act entitled, and entitled people make me uncomfortable. I'm also married, 33F, Sarah, and we've been living in our house for about 2 years now. Things are going well, life is stable and we're comfortable. Sarah and I have always made it a point to keep our home peaceful and stress-free. We don't want drama, especially when it comes to family. Now, here's where things get complicated. Last week, Emily reached out and said she needed a place to stay for a few days. She explained that she just had a huge fight with her roommate and was feeling overwhelmed and lost and needed a safe space. She promised it would only be for a few days, and honestly, I felt guilty saying no. I knew she didn't have anywhere else to go, and despite our differences, I care about her. I told Sarah about the situation, and while she was a little hesitant, she agreed to let Emily stay with us. Emily showed up on Thursday evening, and everything was fine at first. She was polite, kept to herself, and seemed genuinely grateful to be there. I was relieved that it wasn't going to turn into some big drama right away. But then, things started going south. On Friday afternoon, I had taken the day off work to handle some personal things, and Sarah and I were planning on spending the day together. Emily, who had been at home, came into the living room and sat down with us. She seemed really off, distracted, agitated, and honestly a little moody. I asked her if she was okay, and she brushed it off. She started talking about how much she hated her roommate and how she had no idea what to do next. Then she began to talk about her job situation, claiming that she wasn't getting paid enough and that she had been unfairly treated by her boss. She went on and on about how everyone in her life was mistreating her, and she was convinced she had been dealt a bad hand. I tried to listen and offer advice, but as soon as I said anything that wasn't validating her perspective, she got defensive. At one point, I told her that maybe it would help if she looked into finding a new job or at least try to speak with her boss about the issues she was having. She snapped at me, saying, "You don't get it. I'm not asking for your advice. I'm just venting." I thought it was a little strange to bring up issues like that when we were supposed to be relaxing, but I let it slide. We continued with our plans for the day and went out for a walk to clear our heads. That evening, things took an even more dramatic turn. I was making dinner when Emily came into the kitchen and started talking to me about how she was feeling trapped and how she hated staying at my house. I was caught off guard. She had just asked to stay here, and now she was complaining about it. I asked her why she felt that way, and she said that she didn't want to be a burden but couldn't stand the idea of being cooped up in someone else's home. At this point, I was starting to get frustrated, but I tried to be calm. I told her that if she was really unhappy, she could leave whenever she wanted. I didn't want her to feel uncomfortable, but I also didn't want to deal with constant negativity. Then, the real issue happened. As we were having dinner, Emily started making these passive-aggressive comments about Sarah and me. She made it clear that she thought we were being too perfect and that our life seemed boring. Sarah and I tried to ignore it, but Emily kept going on about how we were so much better than everyone else and how we always acted like we had it all figured out. She even said that we were too controlling and not fun enough for her to relax. Sarah, who was getting visibly uncomfortable, asked Emily to stop. Emily didn't take it well and snapped back, saying, "Maybe if you were a little more fun, I wouldn't feel so out of place here." It was a weird moment, and we didn't know how to respond. At this point, I had had enough. I told Emily that if she didn't want to be here, she didn't have to stay and could leave whenever she felt like it. She started arguing with me, saying that I was being rude and unsupportive and that I never cared about her feelings. She said that I only cared about my perfect little life and couldn't deal with someone who wasn't constantly smiling and pretending everything was fine. It felt like a complete meltdown. Emily started storming around, throwing her things into a bag and making a scene. I tried to calm her down, but she wouldn't listen. Finally, I told her, "If you're going to act like this, maybe it's best if you just leave. We don't need this drama in our house." She snapped at me and left without another word, and honestly, I was relieved. Now, Emily has been blowing up my phone, saying I'm an asshole for kicking her out and for not supporting her when she needed a place to stay. She's even gone so far as to tell our parents that I was mean to her and didn't even care about her problems. Our parents are really upset with me and have called me selfish for not being more understanding. Here's where I'm torn. I don't think I was wrong to set boundaries. Emily wasn't respecting our space, and her behavior was toxic. But I feel guilty for kicking her out, especially when she said she didn't have anywhere else to go. My wife Sarah says I did the right thing, but I still wonder if I could have handled it differently. AITA for refusing to help my sister after she caused a scene at my house. AITA for telling my friend I don't want to be friends anymore after they kept asking for favors. I, 27M, have a close friend, Nick, 28M, who I've known since high school. We've been through a lot together, both the good and the bad, and I considered him one of my closest friends. Over the years, our relationship has been mostly solid, and we've always had each other's backs. At least, that's how I thought it was. Over the last year or so, though, things have gotten complicated. I've always been the type of person who tries to help out others when I can. I'm not rich, but I'm financially comfortable, and I've always been the friend people can rely on if they're in a tight spot. If someone asks for help, I don't mind pitching in when I'm able. However, recently, Nick's behavior has been starting to cross a line, and I'm starting to feel resentful about it. It started small at first. Nick would ask for help moving furniture, and I'd gladly do it. Then he asked me for a loan, which I agreed to because he said he was going through a rough patch. I trusted him, and I didn't think it would be a big deal. I helped him out. After that, it seemed like there was always something. Help with rent, covering his portion of shared bill because he was short this month, helping him pick up his car from the mechanic, and even loaning him money for his dog's vet bills when his pet got sick. At first, I didn't mind helping out. I was happy to be there for him, especially when he was in a tough spot. But over time, it started feeling like every time I saw him, there was a new request. I find myself getting texts like, "Hey man, can you spot me $50 this week? I'm having some trouble with bills." Or, "I know it's last minute, but can you pick me up from the airport this weekend?" My ride fell through. The more he asked, the more I felt like I was being taken for granted. Eventually, I started to feel resentful. I would help out, but I'd feel drained and frustrated afterward. I started to notice a pattern. Nick would ask for help, I'd give it to him, and then we wouldn't talk much until he needed something else. It felt like our friendship was becoming more transactional than anything else. I was always the one to offer help, but he never seemed to offer anything in return, whether it was helping me out when I needed something or even just checking in to see how I was doing. One day, I realized that I had loaned him over $2,000 in the past 6 months. I'm not wealthy, and that amount of money is a lot for me to just throw around. At that point, I had already started feeling like I was being manipulated, but I didn't want to believe it. It didn't help that every time I'd ask Nick about paying me back, he would have an excuse or would promise to send me money next week, but would never actually follow through. I'd ask again a few weeks later, and he'd act surprised, apologizing, and promising to pay me back, but nothing would change. Then came the breaking point. A few weeks ago, Nick reached out and asked if he could borrow $300 to help cover some car repairs. He told me that his credit cards were maxed out and that he couldn't get a loan from his bank. I was already frustrated with the pattern of borrowing money and not getting it back, but I agreed to lend him the money, again thinking it would be a one-off situation. The next day, Nick texted me and asked if I could lend him an additional $200, saying he had forgotten about a medical bill. I was fed up at this point. I told him I didn't have the money to lend him anymore, and that I felt like he was taking advantage of my generosity. Nick didn't take it well. He got defensive and told me that I was being selfish and unsupportive, and that he thought I was his friend, not just someone who only cares about money. He said that I was acting like I was too good to help him, and that I should be able to help him without expecting anything in return because friends help each other out. I tried to explain to him that it wasn't about the money. It was about the fact that I was always the one giving, and I never felt like he appreciated it. He hadn't paid me back for the money I lent him in the past, and he never seemed to even ask how I was doing. I told him that it felt like our friendship had become one-sided, and I didn't want to be in a friendship where I was constantly expected to give but never received anything in return. Nick didn't take any of this well. He accused me of being petty and greedy and told me that if I didn't want to help him, then maybe I didn't really consider him a friend after all. I told him that I felt like I couldn't keep doing this anymore and that I needed space. We ended the conversation, but since then, Nick has been reaching out to me, sending messages asking for just a little bit of help or trying to guilt trip me by saying that real friends would never turn their back on each other. It's been a few weeks since that conversation, and I've been really torn about whether or not I made the right choice. Part of me feels guilty because I know he's been through some tough times, but another part of me feels completely justified in stepping back. I'm tired of being the person everyone comes to for help, but when it's my turn to ask for something, no one is there. I don't want to feel like I'm being manipulated, and I don't want to keep enabling someone who seems perfectly capable of helping themselves, but chooses not to. So, AITA for telling my friend that I don't want to be friends anymore after he kept asking for favors and not respecting my boundaries. AITA for refusing to let my sister-in-law take my daughter to her family reunion. So I, 30F, have a 5-year-old daughter, Sophie, and I'm married to my husband, Greg, 32M. Sophie is my little world, and I try my best to protect her and make sure she's in environments where she feels safe and happy. Greg and I have always agreed on raising her with boundaries and making sure she knows how to handle new situations. Now, I want to preface this by saying I have a good relationship with Greg's side of the family, but there's one person in particular that I'm having serious issues with, his sister, Rachel, 34F. I've never had any major issues with her until recently, but things have gotten tense between us, and I'm really starting to question her intentions. A few weeks ago, Greg's family was planning a big reunion at his parents' house, and everyone was invited. The reunion was going to be a whole weekend event, with family from all over the country coming in. It's a yearly thing, and typically Greg and I would both go with Sophie. But this time, there was a catch. Rachel asked if she could take Sophie by herself to the reunion. At first, I didn't think much of it. I know Rachel loves Sophie and would probably enjoy spending time with her, but when I thought about it more, I started feeling uncomfortable with the idea. You see, Rachel has always been a little overbearing. She's the kind of person who likes to be the center of attention and has a tendency to push her own agenda, even when it's not appropriate. She's had issues in the past with respecting boundaries, especially when it comes to Sophie. A few months ago, Rachel tried to get Sophie to call her Annie Rachel instead of just Rachel because she thought it would make her feel more like family. At first, I thought it was a small thing, but when she kept pushing, I had to explain to her that Sophie could call people whatever she felt comfortable with. I wasn't trying to be rude, but I wasn't about to let Rachel pressure Sophie into doing something just to make her feel validated. Another thing is, Rachel has been known to have some questionable parenting ideas. She's the type to tell Sophie things like, it's okay to lie if you're doing it to protect someone's feelings, or you don't need to listen to adults if you don't like them. I've had to step in and correct her before, and while I don't want to make things awkward, I do feel like I need to protect my daughter from people who might lead her down the wrong path. So, when Rachel asked if she could take Sophie to the reunion, my gut reaction was a firm no. I told her that I didn't feel comfortable with Sophie going alone with her, especially considering the fact that the reunion would be full of people who Sophie didn't know very well. I also told Rachel that I wasn't sure if I wanted to have Sophie away from me for that long, as I've never left her for more than a night with anyone other than family I trust 100%. Rachel didn't take my refusal well. She immediately started accusing me of being overprotective and trying to control Sophie's relationships with her extended family. She said I was making her feel like she wasn't trustworthy and that I should let Sophie experience family events without me hovering over her. She also said that I was holding on to her too tightly and that I needed to let Sophie grow up and learn how to trust others. I explained that it wasn't about trust, but about my discomfort with the situation. I told her that I didn't feel that Sophie should be away from me for an entire weekend, especially with someone who has shown that they don't always respect my parenting choices. I told Rachel that I wasn't saying she couldn't spend time with Sophie in the future, but I just didn't feel comfortable with her taking her to a large event with people I didn't know well. That's when things really escalated. Rachel went to Greg and told him that I was being unreasonable and that I was denying Sophie the opportunity to bond with her family. She said I was making her the bad guy and that I was spoiling Sophie by not letting her have these experiences. Greg was caught in the middle, but he ended up agreeing with Rachel and told me that I should reconsider my decision. He said that it was important for Sophie to have those experiences and that I was being too controlling. I felt completely blindsided by Greg's support of Rachel. We've always been on the same page when it comes to parenting, but this situation made me feel like he was undermining my instincts as a mother. I tried to explain to him that it wasn't about not trusting Rachel, but that I felt it was too much too soon for Sophie to be away from me for an entire weekend with people she didn't know that well. I also reminded him of the way Rachel had acted before and how uncomfortable I felt about her pushing boundaries with Sophie. Greg kept saying I needed to let it go and that I was overthinking it. I ultimately stood my ground, telling Greg that I didn't want Sophie to go without me and that I wouldn't be comfortable with it. Greg ended up going to the reunion alone, and I stayed home with Sophie. Rachel has been texting me, calling me controlling, and telling me that I'm ruining Sophie's relationship with her family. She even went so far as to say that I was keeping Sophie away from people who love her and that I needed to get over myself. Since the reunion, things have been really tense. Greg is still a bit upset with me, and Rachel has been spreading the word to other family members, saying that I refuse to let Sophie have fun and that I'm too protective. Some of Greg's relatives have reached out to me, asking if everything is okay and telling me that I need to let Sophie experience family bonding. I feel like I'm in the wrong, but at the same time, I still don't think I should have let Sophie go, especially with Rachel. So, AITA for refusing to let my sister-in-law take my daughter to her family reunion. AITA for telling my brother I won't attend his birthday after he invited my ex. I, 28F, have a brother, Matt, 26M, and we've always been pretty close growing up. We would hang out, play video games, and share jokes. As adults, we've both grown into our own lives but still try to make time for each other. I've always tried to support him, especially with his big milestones and celebrations. About a year ago, I went through a pretty rough breakup with my ex, Jason, 29M. Jason and I had been together for about 3 years before we called it quits. It wasn't a messy breakup, but it was emotionally taxing, especially for me. Jason had been a big part of my life, and losing him left a gap that took time to heal. Matt and Jason had always gotten along well, so naturally, Matt was caught in the middle of it all. When the breakup happened, Matt was supportive, but I could tell he was a little awkward about the whole situation. It didn't help that Jason and I remained on decent terms after we broke up, but I made it clear that I didn't want to continue hanging out with him or keeping up the same level of communication. I felt it was important to create space for myself to move on. Since then, I've kept my distance from Jason. We didn't have any bad blood, but the idea of seeing him regularly was emotionally draining for me, and I knew that I needed to keep him out of my personal life to truly heal. Fast forward to a few weeks ago. Matt's birthday was coming up, and he invited me to his party. I was looking forward to it, and I even asked what he wanted for a gift. Matt casually mentioned that he was having a small get-together with a few friends, and it was going to be a fun night. I didn't think much of it until a few days ago when Matt texted me the final guest list. Among the list of people he mentioned, I saw Jason's name. I felt my stomach drop when I saw it. I immediately texted Matt, asking him why Jason was invited to the party. He responded saying, "Oh yeah, I talked to Jason, and he said he'd love to come. I know you guys broke up, but he's still part of the group, and I thought it would be fine." I replied saying that it wasn't fine and that I didn't feel comfortable with Jason being there. I was confused and asked why. I told him that I wasn't ready to see Jason yet and that I hadn't healed from the breakup. I explained that I didn't want to feel awkward at his birthday party, and having Jason there would only make me uncomfortable. Matt immediately got defensive and said, "Come on, you're being dramatic. It's just a party. It's not like you have to talk to him." I tried to explain that it wasn't about just being in the same space as Jason. It was about me having the emotional space to heal from the breakup without being constantly reminded of it. I told Matt that it was really important for me to feel comfortable at his party, and if Jason was going to be there, I wouldn't be able to enjoy myself. Matt didn't seem to understand and kept telling me I was overreacting. He said that I was making it difficult for him because Jason was his friend too, and he didn't want to have to choose between us. I told him that I wasn't asking him to choose, but I was setting a boundary to protect my own well-being. I then said that I would prefer not to attend his birthday party if Jason was going to be there. Matt got upset at this point and said, "You're really going to make it about you? I've been looking forward to celebrating with everyone, and now you're ruining it because you can't handle seeing Jason." I tried to explain that it wasn't about ruining his party, but about my emotional health. I told him that I didn't want to go to an event where I would feel miserable or forced to interact with someone I wasn't ready to see. I suggested that we could celebrate together separately, just the two of us, but Matt didn't seem to want that. He insisted that if I didn't come to the party with the full guest list, it would make him look bad in front of the others, and he would feel uncomfortable about me not being there. At this point, I was feeling really hurt. I told him that if he valued my feelings, he would respect my boundaries, and that I wasn't asking for anything unreasonable. He responded by saying, "You're being selfish, and this is going too far. You're asking me to choose between you and Jason, and that's not fair to me." After some back and forth, I told him that I wouldn't attend the party if Jason was invited, and I didn't want to keep arguing about it. Matt got even more upset and said, "Fine, if you're not going to come, then don't bother showing up to anything else ever again. I don't want to deal with this drama." Since then, Matt has barely spoken to me. I tried reaching out to apologize, but he hasn't responded. Jason, on the other hand, reached out to me privately saying he was sorry if I was uncomfortable with the situation and that he didn't want to be the reason I wasn't going to Matt's party. But I still don't feel ready to have any kind of relationship with him. I've been really torn about whether or not I was in the wrong here. I don't want to create more drama in my family, but I also feel that I'm not obligated to put myself in a situation that will hurt me emotionally. I feel like my brother should have been more understanding and supportive of my boundaries, but instead, he's made me feel like I'm the one in the wrong. So, AITA for telling my brother I won't attend his birthday after he invited my ex. AITA for telling my brother I won't attend his birthday after he invited my ex. I, 28F, have a brother, Matt, 26M, and we've always been pretty close growing up. We would hang out, play video games, and share jokes. As adults, we've both grown into our own lives but still try to make time for each other. I've always tried to support him, especially with his big milestones and celebrations. About a year ago, I went through a pretty rough breakup with my ex, Jason, 29M. Jason and I had been together for about 3 years before we called it quits. It wasn't a messy breakup, but it was emotionally taxing, especially for me. Jason had been a big part of my life, and losing him left a gap that took time to heal. Matt and Jason had always gotten along well, so naturally, Matt was caught in the middle of it all. When the breakup happened, Matt was supportive, but I could tell he was a little awkward about the whole situation. It didn't help that Jason and I remained on decent terms after we broke up, but I made it clear that I didn't want to continue hanging out with him or keeping up the same level of communication. I felt it was important to create space for myself to move on. Since then, I've kept my distance from Jason. We didn't have any bad blood, but the idea of seeing him regularly was emotionally draining for me, and I knew that I needed to keep him out of my personal life to truly heal. Fast forward to a few weeks ago. Matt's birthday was coming up, and he invited me to his party. I was looking forward to it, and I even asked what he wanted for a gift. Matt casually mentioned that he was having a small get-together with a few friends, and it was going to be a fun night. I didn't think much of it until a few days ago when Matt texted me the final guest list. Among the list of people he mentioned, I saw Jason's name. I felt my stomach drop when I saw it. I immediately texted Matt, asking him why Jason was invited to the party. He responded saying, "Oh yeah, I talked to Jason, and he said he'd love to come. I know you guys broke up, but he's still part of the group, and I thought it would be fine." I replied saying that it wasn't fine and that I didn't feel comfortable with Jason being there. I was confused and asked why. I told him that I wasn't ready to see Jason yet and that I hadn't healed from the breakup. I explained that I didn't want to feel awkward at his birthday party, and having Jason there would only make me uncomfortable. Matt immediately got defensive and said, "Come on, you're being dramatic. It's just a party. It's not like you have to talk to him." I tried to explain that it wasn't about just being in the same space as Jason. It was about me having the emotional space to heal from the breakup without being constantly reminded of it. I told Matt that it was really important for me to feel comfortable at his party, and if Jason was going to be there, I wouldn't be able to enjoy myself. Matt didn't seem to understand and kept telling me I was overreacting. He said that I was making it difficult for him because Jason was his friend too, and he didn't want to have to choose between us. I told him that I wasn't asking him to choose, but I was setting a boundary to protect my own well-being. I then said that I would prefer not to attend his birthday party if Jason was going to be there. Matt got upset at this point and said, "You're really going to make it about you? I've been looking forward to celebrating with everyone, and now you're ruining it because you can't handle seeing Jason? I tried to explain that it wasn't about ruining his party, but about my emotional health. I told him that I didn't want to go to an event where I would feel miserable or forced to interact with someone I wasn't ready to see. I suggested that we could celebrate together separately, just the two of us, but Matt didn't seem to want that. He insisted that if I didn't come to the party with a full guest list, it would make him look bad in front of the others, and he would feel uncomfortable about me not being there. At this point, I was feeling really hurt. I told him that if he valued my feelings, he would respect my boundaries, and that I wasn't asking for anything unreasonable. He responded by saying, "You're being selfish, and this is going too far. You're asking me to choose between you and Jason, and that's not fair to me." After some back and forth, I told him that I wouldn't attend the party if Jason was invited, and I didn't want to keep arguing about it. Matt got even more upset and said, "Fine, if you're not going to come, then don't bother showing up to anything else ever again. I don't want to deal with this drama." Since then, Matt has barely spoken to me. I tried reaching out to apologize, but he hasn't responded. Jason, on the other hand, reached out to me privately saying he was sorry if I was uncomfortable with the situation and that he didn't want to be the reason I wasn't going to Matt's party. But I still don't feel ready to have any kind of relationship with him. I've been really torn about whether or not I was in the wrong here. I don't want to create more drama in my family, but I also feel that I'm not obligated to put myself in a situation that will hurt me emotionally. I feel like my brother should have been more understanding and supportive of my boundaries, but instead, he's made me feel like I'm the one in the wrong. So, AITA for telling my brother I won't attend his birthday after he invited my ex. AITA for refusing to help my sister pay for her kids' private school tuition after she spent years asking me for money. I, 30F, have a sister, Emily, 33F, who has always had a bit of a strained relationship with money. Over the years, she's gone through several financial difficulties, mostly due to her own decisions, taking out loans she couldn't afford, buying expensive items she didn't need, and generally living beyond her means. I'm not saying I don't sympathize with her. I understand how easy it is to fall into a bad financial situation. But despite having had multiple conversations with her about budgeting, saving, and being more responsible, she never seemed to change much. I've been lucky enough to have a stable job and decent salary, and as a result, I've been able to save and keep myself financially secure. But that also means I'm the person Emily always turns to when she's in a financial bind. Over the years, I've loaned her money more times than I can count, and while I don't expect her to pay me back in full, I've asked her to at least try and be more responsible in the future. I've always tried to help, but I'm starting to feel resentful. About 3 years ago, Emily and her husband decided to enroll their kids, a 9-year-old son and a 6-year-old daughter, in a private school. It's a great school, but it comes with a hefty price tag. I understand wanting the best education for your kids, but the tuition is something like $15,000 per child per year, and Emily and her husband, who works in construction, don't make enough to comfortably afford that kind of expense. But despite this, they enrolled the kids anyway. At the time, Emily didn't ask me directly for money, but mentioned that they were struggling to make ends meet with the tuition costs and had to take out loans to cover it. I offered some advice on managing their finances and suggested a few cheaper schooling options that could still offer quality education, but she didn't want to hear it. She was adamant about the private school and kept saying it was worth the financial strain because this is what's best for the kids. Over the past 3 years, Emily's financial situation has only gotten worse. She constantly asks me for small loans to help cover household expenses, car repairs, and things like groceries when she's short on cash. Each time, I help her out because I want to be supportive, but I've started noticing a pattern. The loans are getting bigger, and the excuses are becoming more frequent. She hasn't been able to pay me back, and she hasn't even attempted to cut back on a lifestyle that's clearly contributing to her financial problems. Then, last month, she called me and told me that the tuition for the kids' school was due, and they didn't have enough money saved up to pay it. She was upset, and I could hear the stress in her voice. She said that if she didn't come up with the money, her kids might have to leave the school. She asked if I could help cover part of the tuition, $5,000, so they could keep the kids enrolled. She promised she'd pay me back as soon as possible. At first, I was torn. I care about my niece and nephew, and I understand wanting to give them the best possible education, but I've also been saying for years that Emily needed to get a handle on her finances. I've seen her make the same mistakes over and over again, and at this point, I was starting to feel like my help was enabling her behavior instead of encouraging her to take responsibility for her own financial decisions. I told her I couldn't just give her the money and that I didn't feel comfortable helping her out in the same way again. I explained that I had already lent her thousands of dollars over the years, and it was clear she wasn't making any real changes to her spending habits. I also told her that I was worried about the message it sent to her kids, that money problems could always be solved by asking family for a handout instead of learning how to budget and prioritize. Emily got really upset. She started crying and said that I didn't understand how hard things were for her. She said she was just trying to do what was best for her kids, and I was making it harder for her by not helping. She accused me of being selfish and said I didn't care about her or her family. She even said that if I truly loved her, I would help her out without question. She mentioned that our parents had always been generous with her, and she felt like I should be too. I told her that I loved her, but that didn't mean I should keep enabling her poor financial choices. I reminded her that she had asked for money multiple times in the past, and that I had always come through for her. I told her that she needed to take responsibility for her own life and stop relying on me to bail her out every time she made a bad financial decision. I also mentioned that if she truly believed in the private school, maybe it was time to reconsider whether it was worth the sacrifice, given how much strain it was putting on their family. We ended the conversation with her being angry at me, and I haven't heard from her much since then. I feel terrible about it because I know the situation is hard for her, but I also feel like I'm constantly being put in the position of being the financial savior. It's affecting my relationship with her, and I'm starting to feel like I'm being used. Since then, my parents have reached out to me, asking why I'm being so cold toward Emily. They said that I should help her out, especially since they've always been willing to lend a hand. They told me that I should be supportive of her during this tough time, but I feel like my boundaries are being disrespected. Now, I'm really questioning if I did the right thing. A part of me feels guilty for not helping her because I know her kids deserve a good education. But at the same time, I feel like I'm being taken advantage of and that my helping her might just keep her stuck in this cycle of poor financial decision-making. So, AITA for refusing to help my sister pay for her kids' private school tuition after years of her asking me for money. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss new videos. Also, leave a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Your support and engagement mean a lot to me. See you in the next video.